Good morning and welcome back to the garage. So today I could be outside riding. It's a zone 2 day, so an endurance ride, but what I'm going to do is be doing a sort of zone 2 power test. So basically getting in a zone 2 ride, but at the same time sort of monitoring my data to see how fit I am. And why am I doing it inside? Well, I find it so much easier when you're inside to do a zone 2 ride, which is really zone 2. You can really make sure you don't have to go hard up hills, or there's, you know, traffic lights slowing you down or stopping you and you're getting out your rhythm. You can just stay for as long as you like in zone 2, which in my case is probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours max. I do know some people who do it indoors and they're riding for literally hours, 2 or 3, 4 hours. But as I said, it's as much as I can do to do a couple of hours. So what do you actually do during the test? Firstly, ideally, you need heart rate and power, and very inconveniently, my heart rate doesn't seem to be up on the screen at the moment, so I'm going to have to wait a few minutes for my heart rate to, or my heart rate monitor to be picked up. Okay, so maybe we should, in case you're not sure, look at what zone 2 is. And zone 2, or your sort of aerobic base riding, is riding below your first lactate threshold, which basically means riding below that point where your lactate in your body, we've probably all heard of lactate and lactic acid, but lactate is produced when you exercise. Well, it's produced all the time really, but certainly when you exercise, and there is a point when, rather than just staying in a static amount of lactate in your body, it starts to ramp up a bit, and that's your first lactate turn point, or LT1, or zone 2 if you prefer. And the idea is to keep your riding below that, because that's the point that really taxes or aids your aerobic system. You get aerobic benefits from riding pretty much in most zones, but the thing with zone 2 is you can do a lot of it and it doesn't take too much strain out of your body, and it's a very good sort of zone to be in, to be able to increase your aerobic capabilities, increase your mitochondria, and give you that big base that you need if you want to get fitter and faster. You can't get really fit without having good aerobic base. So what are we going to do today then? Well, I'm riding on my turbo or trainer, and I know my zone 2 heart rate, and roughly, well, top of zone 2 is around 130 to 140, depending on what system you're looking at or who you're asking to make your zones. But I tend to keep it around 130 and 135, something like that. And I know if I'm doing that out on the bike, I know I'm riding in zone 2 pretty much, and I can have a conversation. So the idea of this is doing zone 2, but at the same time looking at zone 2 and seeing what my power is. And I know again roughly what my zone 2 power is. Probably in the middle of it is around 150, 160, 170 watts, something like that. I know I'm sort of zone 2 power. And if I do a long 3 or 4 hour ride, when I come back it's probably averaging around that. But one thing you can do, and what I'm doing today to really test you, is looking at heart rate decoupling, or heart rate drift, or cardiac drift. So basically if you ride at, you can either do it either way, ride at a set power ride at 150 watts, if that's your zone 2, and see what your heart rate is. As I said, mine's about 130. So if I'm riding at 150 watts, 130 heart rate, I might find I could do that for half an hour or an hour, and then gradually my heart rate is drifting up. And I'm still doing 150 watts, but now my heart rate's 135 or 140. And there is a drift between those two numbers. And that shows you roughly how sort of fit you are. The longer you can maintain those numbers together, the fitter you are at that sort of level, at your level. Obviously, people like Pogacar are going to have huge power numbers at his zone 2, but he's still, over his 3, 4, 5 hour rides, probably monitoring whether his heart rate is drifting up for that power. So if you do it on power, you can do it that way. Or today I'm going to do it the opposite way. I'm going to try to maintain a heart rate of around 130, 135, and just keep riding at that. And if I see my heart rate drifting up, I'm going to lower the power. And so, although my heart rate may stay the same, my power is going to be probably getting lower, especially this time of year, especially as I was ill for a good few weeks over Christmas and into January. So I'm not expecting great things. But that is the basic idea of doing this sort of aerobic testing. And as I said, if you could do an hour, 2 hours, and your heart rate or power doesn't drift apart too much from those sort of initial figures, you're doing pretty well. And ideally, if you could get to a couple of hours and they don't drift, you know, you can start pushing up those, or that power number, and after doing, you know, a lot of it, you'll find that for the same heart rate, instead of riding at 160 watts, you're riding at 170 watts or 180 watts for that same heart rate. And it's really that base that gives you all your aerobic capabilities and, you know, a huge base to build on, to build a peak, to get really fit. So as I said, at the moment I'm just testing where it is, but over the next month or two, the more I do of this, the more I'm going to hope to see that I can push up the power a bit, and maybe switch over sometimes to having a set power, pushing it up, and seeing if I can maintain a heart rate for a higher power. But again, it's more about lengthening the time you're doing it rather than necessarily keep pushing it up. You just want to be able to ride all day at this zone 2 pace. So at the moment I'm just doing a sort of a warm-up. Not that you need to warm up to zone 2, but I find my heart responds better if I gradually build up to that zone 2, just warm my legs up, get the blood flowing, and I find I respond better. And funnily enough, quite often I find after half an hour or something of zone 2, when my body's really sort of got everything working as it should, my heart rate does drop a bit, and I do, you know, maintain those sort of numbers I was looking for. So it might take a lot of practice, but eventually you will find those numbers staying closer and closer together, meaning you're getting fitter and fitter. Okay, a couple of tips as you might be into your zone 2 testing. One is try to change your cadence, because if you stay at the same cadence the whole time, your body's going to get really fatigued. You know, your muscles aren't used to working at exactly the same power and speed continually. When you're out on the road, you're changing all the time. Another thing is it's generally better to stick to heart rates for zone 2, because if you stay on power, that doesn't take into account whether you're fatigued, how much you've been doing, whether you had good sleep last night. Whereas when you're in heart rate, that does show that. And so it's better to stay within your heart rate zone 2 than force yourself to do the power zone 2 and find your heart rate's much higher than it should be. And don't forget to keep a record of your heart rate and power so you can see progress over time. I tend to average it out over however long I've done, an hour and a half, and notice that heart rate drift, or notice that power dropping. And don't forget, if you change position, that can affect your heart rate. For example, if you sit up, you're going to be using more energy holding your body up, your heart rate's going to raise. So try to watch out for that. And if you're on a long ride, you know, an hour, 2 hours, don't forget to fuel. Keep having a drink, keep hydrated, and take in some energy if you need to. And another is make sure you change positions. If you're stuck like this for hours, you're going to really start feeling it and your backside's going to hurt. So make sure every now and then you stand up, go to change the position, let that blood flow, and then back down and carry on. Okay, just about 2 hours done, including the warm-up. Let's have a quick cool down and then go inside and look at some of the data. Okay, so we're back inside now and having a look at the data. So as you can see on the screen now, I've got how long have I got? Just over 2 hours, but really it started from about here, which was after that sort of little warm-up. And I've done, before I started to do a cool down and get off the bike and everything, about an hour and 3/4. Average power 158 watts, average 158, normalized 158, so it's pretty much the same. Heart rate 129. So that's a good benchmark for me to see that I was sort of, if anything, slightly below that target of 130, 135, 158. It was a sort of 160 watts I was sort of seeing on screen a lot of the time. But that looks okay. And more importantly, if you do the first half of the ride, which was, or not even the first half of the ride, say the first 20 minutes or so, that was again 159 watts, 131 heart rate, and the last 20 minutes was 159 watts, 130 heart rate. So pretty much there wasn't much cardiac drift or that decoupling through the ride, which is good. It shows at that sort of pace I'm pretty aerobically capable. What it does tell me is that what I would like to do next time is probably try it at a higher wattage, maybe go for sort of the same heart rate, trying to keep it within the 130 range, but around maybe 170 watts, and see how that goes. And I might notice more decoupling in, you know, that period of time. But basically you can see a very, you know, pretty much consistent power, more importantly heart rate very consistent the whole way through. It's a pretty good indicator of where I'm at, and hopefully, of course, the whole point is that the more aerobic training I do, the more zone 2 training I do, that wattage should be I should be capable of doing that wattage on a lower heart rate, or for the same heart rate I should be able to start pushing my power up a bit and develop that. But it's that sort of developing the longevity of it and the length of the time you're actually in the zone is one of the most important things. Constantly pushing it up and up and up isn't necessarily as beneficial as stretching out the amount of time you can maintain that. And I know last year when I was doing this a lot at the beginning of the year, I was sort of probably for the same heart rate doing about 160, 75, 180 watts, so probably about 20 watts higher. So there's lots of room for improvement. So that's it. I hope you found the video useful. I hope you maybe got something out of it and could try this at home yourself or even out on the road. If you've got any questions or comments, don't forget to drop them down below and I'll try to answer any questions you might have. And until next time, bye for now.